think you can handle the world's first psychological thrill ride? Revenge of the Mummy, the ride.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Vincent Vision. Watch how. That's my early 2000s commercial guy voice. This video is going to be a dive into one of my favorite rides at Universal, the Revenge of the Mummy. And I'm sure probably one of your favorite rides too. This is a fan favorite ride that has been in the park now for almost over 21 years. In this video, I want to talk about everything that involves the Revenge of the Mummy, the ride that used to be there, Kongfrontation, the creation of the roller coaster, and some secrets and fun facts about the ride and queue experience that you might have not picked up on your first ride through. But let's get ready to explore the Revenge of the Mummy. Any good story about a ride at Universal Studios Florida starts at the park's opening in 1990. The exciting new movie park opened with some incredibly ambitious rides, like Jaws, where the original version of the ride actually had a scene where the shark grabbed, and I say that in parenthesis, onto the boat and dragged it through the water. And also a finale scene where the shark exploded into bloody chunks like the movie, which I don't think gets talked about very often. There was E.T. Adventure, Universal's family ride, where E.T. himself thanked guests personally for saving the day by name. And there were some future projects in the pipeline, like Back to the Future the ride, which at the time would have the largest OmniMax screens built, 2 of them being 84 feet tall. But the biggest resident at Universal when the park opened up was a gorilla who goes by the name of King Kong. Kongfrontation was the park's big showstopper in 1990, and for good reason. This slow-moving ride featured an impressive recreation of New York City that riders would hang above as they came face-to-face with 2 39-foot-tall gorillas that blew banana breath at you. The ride itself wasn't super thrilling, but did have one moment where Kong shook the Roosevelt Island tram that you were on, and riders would drop a few feet down. This ride was one of the most popular in the park and would often have one of the highest wait times because of its lower capacity. This ride was also plagued with problems. This was a very special effects heavy ride, and a lot of those effects would often break, including the Kongs, who had their complex movement limited to avoid technical problems. The ride lived a decent life at Universal Studios until it was eventually announced that Kongfrontation was closing on September 8th, 2002. This ride had an epic goodbye. Universal actually gave guests bananas on the last day, and they got to escape Kong's clutches one last time. In 2002, though, people didn't know what would be replacing this classic ride, but one thing was certain. It had to be just as big or bigger than what was there before. And luckily for us, Universal had the perfect replacement in mind. The space that Kongfrontation left behind was gigantic. In fact, it was the largest ride building at the time, spawning over 70,000 square feet, and it still might be. I'd have to compare that between the size of like Gringotts and Fast and Furious, but it's a very big building. So whatever took its place needed to use that show building to its fullest potential. And a couple of things were going on in the grand Universal timeline around 1999 that would help them decide on what that was. The first was the addition of their newest park, Islands of Adventure, in May of '99. This park was incredibly advanced with standout rides like The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man, but IOA also had another clear distinction from Universal Studios: roller coasters. Islands of Adventure had 2, technically 3, intense and exciting coasters in their park with the Incredible Hulk and Dueling Dragons. Do you know what the only roller coaster at Universal Studios was? Woody Woodpecker's Nut House Coaster, a kiddie coaster. The original park needed some love, and it got some with the addition of Men in Black Alien Attack in 2000, but it was still lacking in thrill rides. And luckily for Universal, a thrilling and exciting movie franchise had just started out in 1999, The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser. Both the first Mummy movie and its sequel were uber successful for Universal, as the 2 movies combined had grossed over $1 billion. With an exciting and popular film franchise, plus the park's need for a thrilling roller coaster, the stars aligned and Universal began to work on its first ever, and only, psychological thrill ride. Now, who gets to build the Revenge of the Mummy coaster, huh? Universal needs a manufacturer who has expertise in building indoor roller coasters, and that ends up being a company known as Premier Rides. These guys built a ride similar to the Mummy, known as Flight of Fear at Kings Island in 1996. They're also very good at building launch coasters, which is what you need to do when you gotta build up coaster speeds in a limited space. The Mummy uses LIM, linear inductor motor launches, to propel guests up its 44-foot tall hill to reach top speeds of 40 miles per hour through the former Kong building. Now, if you're gonna ask me to explain how LIMs work, this is not the video where you're gonna find an answer, okay? All I can say to that is magnets. It's magnets. How do they work? I don't know. negative and positive, all right? But after Kong's closure in 2002, The Revenge of the Mummy officially opens at Universal on May 21st, 2004, with an explosive grand opening ceremony, and with a special appearance from Brendan Fraser himself. While this video is mainly focusing on the Florida version of The Mummy, I shouldn't forget to mention that a second version of the ride actually opens the same year, a month later, at Universal Studios Hollywood. The California park gets their own version of The Mummy, but instead in what used to be their E.T. Adventure, which closed in 2003. This version of the ride was also made by Premier Rides, but the big difference between the two is that the former ET building was much smaller, so the coaster part of the ride is very different. Instead of an upwards launch, the coaster goes straight ahead and also has a much longer backwards part of the ride. But now that the Museum of Antiquities has opened its doors for guests, we're gonna go quiet on the set and get ready to step into the latest Mummy movie. Now, the storyline of The Revenge of the Mummy can be a little unclear for the average guests. It's a little meta, right? It blurs the line between behind the scenes and immersive experience a little too well. I'll do my best to explain it to you really quick if you don't pay attention when you're there. We, at Universal Studios, are entering the set of the latest Mummy movie, which is called The Revenge of the Mummy. Remember, in 2004, the third Mummy movie, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, hasn't come out yet, and we are going to be extras on the set of the film. This movie is being filmed in the New York area of Universal, and they're using the exterior of the Penn Station facade as the Museum of Antiquities. This was the original idea for the ride's entrance, though some could argue that it's been changed with the Sahara Trader's gift shop now being themed to the museum, making it a real location in the story now? I don't know. Anyway, you enter the building where you are now on the set of the new movie. There's a really fun mockumentary style video playing in this part of the queue that I'd recommend watching if you're in there long enough. Brendan Fraser is in his prime in this video. We're introduced to the very important character Reggie, and we even get a cameo from Zelda Rubinstein, the actress who played the medium in the movie Poltergeist. This part of the queue has a lot of costumes and prosthetics, making it feel like you're truly behind the scenes. But there's a big door that you walk by when you first enter that was actually used in the Mummy movie. I also like to look at the little details on this bulletin board. When I went to go look at this bulletin board, I was expecting to see a picture of Reggie like there's always been, but it seems now, instead of Reggie, they'll actually put a picture of what I'm assuming is like the employee of the month at the Mummy ride, which I think is pretty cool. Where has he gone? He is supposed to be getting Brendan's coffee. Now, it's time to step onto the set. But you see, it's no longer just a movie set. Turns out Imhotep's curse is real, and we have been transported to 1940s Egypt. Along this part of the queue, there are hieroglyphics that spell out real warnings. I couldn't tell you what they say exactly, but I did stumble upon a page called The Self-Taught Egyptologist, who has visited the Revenge of the Mummy ride and shows us some recognizable hieroglyphics that you might see in the queue. There's also a glyph, a symbol that you see constantly throughout the queue in the ride that is meant to symbolize the mark of Imhotep. Coincidentally enough, it also looks a lot like an angry, roaring gorilla. Some have theorized that this is one of the many references to King Kong at the Mummy ride, which we'll get into a little bit more later, but what do you guys think? This part of the queue is dark, spooky, and also has a lot of fun interactive elements that can easily be missed. The first is right in the center of the room. It looks like a large treasure chest with a sign nearby that reads, "Evil by one hand, protection by two." Most people don't read that and just put like one hand on the treasure chest. And when you do that, the whole room, all the lights in the room flicker and you hear spooky sounds. What you're supposed to actually do is have two people place their palms on the chest at the same time. And when done properly, the symbol of the Magi will appear above you on the ceiling. That'll keep you safe from the mummy for a couple of seconds. My favorite has to be the blue scarab mirror that when lit up, pressing it will give people in line ahead of you an air blast jump scare. This is the spot in the queue right here, just so you can line it up for yourself. Another really cool one is in this small room, which to me is the most authentic feeling room in the whole queue. It's very cramped with a low ceiling, like how it would actually be if you were in a pyramid. In this room, you can reach out towards a treasure, which is the key that unlocks the Book of the Dead from the Mummy movies. Grab it, and you'll get an express pass for any ride in the park, I promise. When the Revenge of the Mummy was getting worked on, it was known as Project Coin, because treasure rooms have coins. It can be hard to see, but on this table before you go up the stairs to get on the ride, there's actually a coin from the original Kongfrontation ride. I'd say that the Mummy probably shows the most love to any former attraction in the park. But now, it is time to head up the stairs and get onto the ride. Now it is time for your big part in the latest Mummy movie, where the scene involves you getting on a minecart and riding through an Egyptian tomb for some reason. On the front of the minecart is the company UC & Sons, which is a reference to Universal's team that is responsible for bringing rides like The Mummy to life, Universal Creative, giving themselves a little pat on the back. Now we're entering the Mummy's tomb. It's dark, it's spooky, there are skeletons everywhere, but look closely at the mummies against the wall. Some of these guys are actually wearing hats and sunglasses. Are these former tourists, or are they just cool mummies? Then we turn the corner to find our beloved Reggie a little too late because Imhotep has wrapped him up and is getting ready to steal his soul. This first scene has a lot of fun things to talk about. An effect I remember vividly that I don't really see anymore was the soul-stealing effect. A blue light would shine out of Reggie's mouth, and vapor would come out like Imhotep was sucking the life out of him. Does anyone else know what I'm talking about when I talk about this effect, or is it something that I made up in my head? One of the most impressive animatronics at the time was Imhotep. The figure stands 6'8" and weighs over 680 pounds. And while there have been much more impressive figures created since 2004, Imhotep was very special because it actually appeared as if he was jumping out of his sarcophagus towards riders. He's got a lot of moving parts though, so sometimes you'll see what they call B mode, an alternate version of the scene when the animatronic isn't working. Instead of Imhotep jumping out to see you, his face would be projected on the sarcophagus he's locked in. After Imhotep arrives, we are led into the treasure room, where we are offered an ultimatum: serve him and savor the riches of eternal life, or refuse and suffer a more bitter treasure, which is death. He's saying he's gonna kill us with his mummy warriors. This room has two very popular Easter eggs. The first is a golden gorilla statue meant to pay tribute to Kongfrontation. On the left side of the room, at the end of the pile of treasure, stands a 3-foot tallish statue of King Kong beating his chest. On the other side of that same room is a big banana stacked up on top of the treasure. The room is brightest after the mummy warriors pop up, so that's gonna be your best chance to see these Easter eggs. You escape the falling wall and reach a dead end. Oh no! This is when you come face to face with 1,000 animated scarabs and escape down a 5 or 7 foot, not very long drop into the darkness. It always kind of seems like people scream at that drop, right? Well, that's because there's actually pre-recorded screams that are a part of the ride. So if you were riding alone and you didn't make a sound, you would still hear the screams. Spooky. Now, the real fun begins. Your vehicle begins to turn on a giant turntable, and you prepare to get launched up into the coaster. Then you fly through the roller coaster portion of this ride, which is not as intense as it might feel when you're on the actual ride. The dark does a really good job at tricking you into thinking much more is going on. It's one part of the psychological thrill ride experience. This is a great illustration of the ride's layout done by the very talented Park Lore that shows you pretty much exactly how you move through the ride. Pretty cool to see, huh? As you're going through the roller coaster, all of a sudden you hit the brakes hard into the fake ending scene. The mummy appears in the ride operator booth and says that classic line, "Death is only the beginning," as the ceiling itself catches on fire. This is an effect that Universal calls brain fire because it's happening on top of our heads and the rolling flames look like a brain. The room gets up to 107 degrees in that moment before you drop down back into the underworld and escape by the grace of the Magi as Brendan Fraser welcomes you back in the most iconic scene of this ride.
Hey, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed yourself. I would have enjoyed this interview a lot more if I had gotten my cup of coffee! Thank you.
Now that we've escaped Imhotep's clutches, we exit through the gift shop, and let's talk about some of my favorite fun facts for this ride. Something that I forgot to mention about the former ride, Kongfrontation, is that the track for the ride was actually built into the building's infrastructure. So because of that, when it was time to replace the ride with the Mummy, it was going to be very expensive to try to remove it. So they've actually left the former Kongfrontation ride track on the ceiling of the building. And when you are on the Revenge of the Mummy, you can actually see it if you look up. It's all still there, but but can really only be seen during the coaster portion of the ride. So if you're riding at night or your eyes have adjusted to the darkness, look up, you'll see a true tribute to the former ride. Now this video is about the Orlando version of the ride, and I've briefly mentioned the Hollywood one, but did you know that there's actually a third Revenge of the Mummy? It's located all the way over at Universal Studios Singapore, and it's in their ancient Egypt land. It has the exact same layout as the Orlando ride, but some big differences in the storyline. You're not making a movie, there's no Magi, and there's definitely no Brendan Fraser or Reggie. Instead, you're trying to find the Book of the Living to destroy Imhotep forever, and because of that, you're getting some major changes in big scenes of the ride, like in the beginning where now Imhotep is sacrificing some guy on the table instead of Reggie. The fake unload scene takes place inside the mummy's tomb instead of the ride, and instead of Brendan Fraser at the end asking for his cup of coffee, you get Imhotep locked up in a sarcophagus saying, "No, I'll have my revenge, I'll get out of here," or something like that. And there you have it, folks. That is everything I've got on the Revenge of the Mummy. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I would have enjoyed making this video a little bit more if I had gotten my cup of coffee. It's okay, I did drink coffee while making this. Thank you to all of my wonderful Patreon supporters for helping me out and helping me create great videos like this one. And as always, if you enjoy videos like this, please be sure to give it a like, subscribe, all of that stuff really helps out. But until then, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you at the next one. Bye-bye.